Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. It's time now for the week that was. Let's take a look at the top stories that made headlines around the globe this week. Now, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Honorable Tajuddin Abbas, this week raised concerns over Nigeria's growing public debt, warning that without transparent management and strict oversight, the burden could threaten the nation's economic stability. Abbas, who was represented at the 11th Annual Conference of the West Africa Association of Public Account Committees in Abuja by House Leader Julius Ihombere, cautioned that Nigeria's debt-to-GDP ratio had hit 52%, exceeding the legal ceiling of 40%, and called on parliaments throughout West Africa to intensify their scrutiny of government borrowing to protect their citizens' future. He called for a shift from external borrowing to domestic resource mobilization and intra-African financial solutions. Let's take a listen.
In Nigeria, recent available data indicate that our debt trajectory has reached a critical point, showing that, like many African countries, we continue to borrow internally and externally to fund capital and sometimes non-capital projects. This highlights the urgent need for a stronger oversight, transparent borrowing practices, and a collective resolve to ensure that tangible economic and social returns match every naira borrowed. Across Africa, debt levels have reached alarming proportions. By 2022, the continent's total public debt had reached $1.8 trillion, with external debts alone surpassing $1 trillion by 2023. Several countries are now in dangerous debt-to-GDP territory.
Dangerous debt territory. You heard him say that there, Adesua. And this is the thing. I think when people heard this comment earlier this week, I don't think you would have caught any people unawares. People wouldn't have been surprised that that is the content of what he said, but perhaps that the vessel coming from the government, the call was definitely coming from inside of the house. So you can understand why it felt perhaps out of place that the government responsible for at least this ballooning debt is saying that perhaps we're going a bit too far. And I think that opens up the conversation, rightly so, about when is enough enough. Now, you do have Honorable Abbas come out and clarify his comments and say that, public debt can be used as a tool to foster growth and prosperity. And on its face, it's true. But how reflective is that of the situation right here in Nigeria when we're looking at already the ceiling, the debt to GDP ratio already going past that 40% ceiling? It does feel as though we're teetering on the territory of perhaps a collapse, unfortunately. What do you think?
Honestly, I think it's very important that this conversation is happening. Unfortunately, it's happening after National Assembly has already approved new loans for the president for his medium to long-term financial framework. Just in July, they approved this loan, and this conversation was not brought forward by the Honorable Speaker, Tajuddin Abbas. And importantly, he says, yes, loans, you take out loans for infrastructure projects, but we have a severe infrastructure deficit. And, we are going to talk about Ethiopia and what they've been able to accomplish with the dam, with the GERD, largest hydro power dam in Africa. However, that was one domestically funded, and it was $5 billion. That's less than half of what is projected to go towards the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway. We took $1.5 billion to fund conditional cash transfers. They said they gave 70 million Nigerians cash transfers, borrowed at $1.5 billion for that. We've also borrowed around $3 billion for the railway, Eastern Railway, for, I think, Maiduguri, the railway going to Maiduguri. Now, where are these projects? And also, is this a prudent way of spending money? When we see what an Ethiopia is doing with $5 billion, we have to question ourselves with what we are doing with the $5 billion. So it's not just that we are borrowing, it's also what we are borrowing for. Yes, they've said that, with the rebasing of our GDP, perhaps it reduced a bit, but also in a single year, our debt profile increased by 22%. 22%, and we do not hold most of our debts. It's held by, global corporations like the World Bank and the IMF, like around 13% by the Chinese. And, Honorable Tajini Abbas was not just speaking to Nigeria, because it was a conference that covered West Africa, yes. Right? And he was talking to these parliamentarians from other areas too, that, Ghana, look at your debt, Sudan, I think their debt to GDP ratio is around 200% or something absolutely frightening. And in our economy like Nigeria, when we're reliant on oil, even though non-oil, revenue makes up most of our GDP, when we're reliant on oil for our foreign exchange, and when we have such an infrastructure gap, we have to question when governments come, because Buhari's government came and they borrowed a lot, and now Tinubu's government has come and they've borrowed a lot, and the question is, what do we have to show for it?
That is always going to be the question, isn't it?
Well, moving on, the National Assembly management has formally rejected Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan's request to the Senate for a return to legislative duties after serving her 6-month suspension over alleged misconduct. Acting clerk to the National Assembly, Dr. Yahaya Danzaria, had, through a letter, stated that the 6-month suspension imposed on the Kogi Central Senator remains in force pending the outcome of the matter currently before the Court of Appeal. The National Assembly management acknowledged Akpoti-Uduaghan's notification of her intended return to the Senate on the 4th of September, the day she claimed marked the end of her suspension. However, the letter clarified that the suspension took effect from the 6th of March 2025 and emphasized that the matter is before the courts and cannot be commented on. The letter stated that the Senate would only review her suspension after the court's final pronouncement, and that she would be duly notified of the Senate's decision on the matter as soon as it is resolved. I've said this before. I will say this again. This is an absolute absurdity. It is an absurdity, and I would actually love to ask the clerk of the Senate, and I'd love a response for him. Under what authority does he have, as an appointed individual, to tell a duly elected member of the Senate that they cannot come back to their offices? He's not a representative. He does not have that. I do not understand where he has the power to do so. Not under the Senate rules, not under our Constitution, and it's not something that is known to our law. And this idea of weaponizing what it is to be sub judice is also bizarre. And I think we also have to ask ourselves this question. When it was Senator Omo Agege, did he return to the Senate when his case was still in court? Yes. When it was Dino Malai, did he return to the House when it was Speaker Bamdele? Did he return to the House? Yes. We have seen time and time again that lawmakers, even on this matter of suspension, will still return to the National Assembly or still return to the House. The single case where we have seen this not apply is another woman, Honorable Rifka Tudana in Bauchi, and the Bauchi State House of Assembly. And we have to question ourselves, not just, because this is no issue now, has gone beyond Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan, and we have to think about the role of Nigerian women in our politics, and we also have to think about whether or not people can place themselves above our law. The Senate rules are not superior to the Constitution. The Senate rule cited here is Rule 40, I believe, or the rule under Section 40, but also their own rules under Section 67(4) says you cannot suspend a senator for more than 14 days. Also, they're now telling us that it's because the case is in court. However, when a federal high court judge ruled on the 4th of March this year, they still suspended her 2 days later, knowing that there was a substituting order. And then they said, oh, the courts can't tell us what to do. And now they're saying, oh no, we're bound by the courts. It's incoherent, and it's something I do not understand. When our Constitution, when a people, and I think this is about the people of Kogi Central now, yes, who have not had a senator to advocate for them, to facilitate projects for them, to move motions on their matter, to speak for them, a senator that they gave their mandate to represent them. They have not been represented or had a voice in the Nigerian Senate since the 6th of March, the people of Kogi Central.
It's very sad. And it's very likely that this situation will continue for a while. And I'm so happy you mentioned the weaponization of subjudice, because what you're doing is effectively, as we've already established, removing the voice and the right that the people of Kogi Central have to be represented at the Senate, within the Senate. The issue here, as you've rightfully made the point that the clerk is, with respect, not someone who really has the authority to dictate what he says he would be able to dictate within his letter. The issue here is, okay, well, Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan, she did send a letter to the clerk. Perhaps would it have been better for her to have sent the letter to the Senate President? Could that have made any difference? And is it fair for us to question that perhaps this clerk is being emboldened by the Senate President? Could that be where this is coming from? Because it doesn't feel as though anyone here is operating with like a level of sense. And usually when things don't make sense, it's because they're being motivated by things that aren't true. If you wanted this person to understand the gravity of their suspension, I think that point has been made. I also understand that Senate actually hasn't resumed yet. They will be resuming on the 23rd, right? Yes. So on its face, when I initially heard the story, I just thought, okay, is it just a bit premature because the senators haven't sat? But it sounds as though that's got nothing to do with it, because she should be able to return to her office, conduct the preliminary duties before Senate resumes. So it feels very, it does feel personal, and it shouldn't be so, because if you've been able, and we discussed this suspension when it first happened, and it was condemned by many people, it just feels as though you're kicking this can down the line. You have a personal vendetta against this woman, and you are trying tooth and nail to keep her from the Senate. And I think that is unfair. And this is the problem when we're talking about gender in this country. As much as we can say that we are progressing and Nigeria needs to move forward, we have to check on an individual basis what feelings we have when it comes to women in positions of power. There are very many conversations I have heard in this country, sometimes within this room, about who she is as a person. Oh, she is this, or she is X, or she is Y, and that justifies her treatment. It's not fair. It shouldn't be done so. And it feels as though whenever we see the long arm of the law working this way, the consensus is the victim must be a woman. Why is that? So I hope that there will be a just and timely resolution to this matter, because at the end of the day, as much as we can say it, it has to be understood. There are people who have elected a senator and they are not being represented. This has gone too far, and I can only hope that this will meet its rightful end sooner rather than later. Well, let's move on. The Nigeria Union of Petroleum and Natural Gas Workers this week announced the suspension of the nationwide strike earlier embarked on to protest what it described as Dangote Refinery anti-labor policies. This follows the signing of a memorandum of understanding by the leadership of the labor unions and representatives of Dangote Petroleum Refinery. The breakthrough was achieved after Monday's talks were deadlocked. Now, negotiations resumed with the Department of State Services brokering a truce between the federal government, oil industry stakeholders, and organized labor. In attendance were the Minister of Finance, Wale Edun, the Minister of Labor and Employment, Mohammed Dingyadi, and the Minister of State, Nkuruka Onyejocha, who, while the Dangote Refinery delegation was led by Sayu Dantata, according to the MOU, the process of unionization would commence immediately and be completed within 2 weeks. It also offers assurances that no worker or employee of Dangote Refineries and petrochemicals would be victimized. Adesua, we went back and forth this week, looking at the different headlines, finding out what's happening. Is there going to be a strike? Is there not going to be a strike? They went for a peace meeting, they were deadlocked, and then there was a truce. But thankful to the DSS, the day after Nupeng said that they want to continue fighting. It just feels as though everyone is tearing singly up and down this week. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on?
Apparently they removed stickers, the Nupeng stickers from the Dangote trucks.
Yes.
And now they are going to put stickers back on the trucks. All I know is that the Nigerian people are happy that we do have we do have oil scarcity.
That one is a win.
You know, I think, and it's important, and we've seen arguments come up of Dangote Refinery saying that, you know, people are well paid for, they're well taken care of. We've seen the workers themselves, the truck drivers themselves come out, and also no one can be forced to join any union, but we're seeing that a unionization process is going to take place. What the Nigerian people want ultimately is no fuel scarcity,
Yes.
no queue, let peace reign in the land. The DSS getting involved, saying that this is a security situation, is something I think should be concerning to the average person.
There is that.
Yeah, should we move to our next story?
Yes, let's go.
Because I don't think this new Peng Dangote story is over just yet. Let's go over to Ethiopia, where they have inaugurated the Grand Renaissance Dam, Africa's largest hydroelectric project, hailed as a game changer for the country's energy sector, but condemned by Egypt as an existential threat. Towering 145 meters high on the Blue Nile, the $4 billion mega structure is designed to generate 5,000 megawatts of electricity, more than doubling Ethiopia's capacity. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, joined by regional leaders, led celebrations marked by lanterns, lasers, and drone displays. Supporters say the dam could power Ethiopia's industrial growth and electrify millions still without access. But Egypt, which depends on the Nile for 97% of its water, warns of dire consequences, vowing to defend its water rights at all costs. Of course, these water rights that Egypt does have was given to it during colonial times by the English, because Egypt was seen as more important than Ethiopia, which is in fact Africa's second most populous nation. I feel like a lot of people forget that or don't know that Ethiopia is a huge country. And 60% of that population does not have proper access to electricity, which they are now going to solve with this dam. This dam is it's a beautiful work. There's a lot of going on here.
Yes.
One, continuation, because Abiy Ahmed was not the person who started this.
Yes.
And the vision and the process to continue this over 15 years shows the importance of governments also having consistency and putting their people first in front of themselves.
Correct.
Another thing that's very incredibly important about this is that it was mostly domestically funded. Ethiopians themselves, from teachers all the way to the richest Ethiopians, bought bonds to partially fund this project. Again, and I say, we look at what Ethiopia can do with 5 billion, we have to question ourselves in this country. If we are borrowing 1.5 to give out cash, and we can see that a hydropower dam is half of the price of what we are quoting for the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway, we must question our fiscal responsibility. What Ethiopia has done here is wonderful, and I think it's something that other African leaders should look at, not just, Nigeria. And we've seen what Ethiopia has also been able to do, just in terms of even Ethiopian Airlines and having a national carrier that's actually profitable. And in terms of positioning themselves, because not only is this for electricity, but also to spur industrial growth. And now they're being positioned as a country where China and other places can go to for manufacturing. And so when you think about, you can see what happens when there's leadership with vision. And when we decide that Africans by Africa, or for Africa can do this for themselves. Now, I know the president said that this is the greatest thing black man has ever done. I don't know if I'll go that far.
Right.
But I do think that they should be lauded for this project.
And lauded they have been. As you've, laid out, this is definitely a wonderful edifice. This is a perfect, illustration of what Africans can do for themselves, by themselves, for the betterment of the people in their country. As you've already rightfully noted, Ethiopia is vast in terms of landmass, and it has a huge population, the vast majority of which do not have direct access to rolling electricity. So this seeks to address that need. It is a wonderful thing. It shows, as you've already said, that a country can be imperfect. Ethiopia does have its issues with conflict, with identity politics, a lot of ethnic tensions, but that hasn't drawn away from the development going on. And many times, if we're using Nigeria as a comparison, I'm never a big fan of comparisons, but perhaps when we see commissioning ceremonies for things on a smaller scale, a big deal is made out of them. And sometimes we also have the issue of, white elephant projects that are started and just not finished. And that speaks to different politicians saying that they don't want to finish somebody else's glory. They don't want to do something that they weren't started for. Everyone cares really about the individual, and almost, I don't want to say never, but if we were to again compare the difference. It just feels as though a lot of things are self-motivated and they don't really care about addressing a need. So in Ethiopia, there's a lesson to be learned here that we can all work together despite our differences to bring development for the people of our country. Now, as positive as the building of this dam is, we also know that it has ruffled a lot of feathers. There are many countries, of course Egypt among them, that depend on the Nile, Sudan to Uganda, a lot of countries that the Nile passes through and depend on this source of water for its own development. From the outset, Egypt were not happy about this. They felt as though downstream it threatens their own existence. They've said many times that no Nile means no Egypt. So we can understand that this is always been a thorn in the side for that country, and it's also fostered a lot of geopolitical tension. So you have, for example, Egypt wanting to foster ties with Somalia, or Somaliland not being on great terms with Somalia, and all of this happening because of really this dam here. So it does also highlight a link between political scientists who have said for decades, actually, that the next world wars, rather than what we're talking about today, which is artificial intelligence or even land, that the next world wars really could be fought over water. Yes. And we can see that this is teetering in that direction. Egypt is not happy. Their needs haven't really been addressed. But again, if we cast our minds back to why Egypt feels as though it has this overarching authority over the Nile, it comes from colonialism. So again, it kind of widens this conversation about how we should be able to dictate our own affairs. But congratulations to Ethiopia. This is something that was not easy to do. That didn't, I mean, obviously $5 billion is a considerable amount of money, but we can see what that money has been spent over. And it goes to your question of, if we are spending a fraction of this on such a wonderful edifice, we should be able to see quite easily this type of development right here in this country. So if we're going to be comparing Nigeria to others for, positive reasons or negative, let's also see that, this is possible on the continent. And as a country that has a huge population, the biggest population on the continent, that this is a great example of what can be done for us too here. So we'll only wait and see. Now, staying with international news, Nepalese Prime Minister P. Sharma Oli was this week forced to resign after at least 19 people were killed in violent protests triggered by his government's sweeping social media ban. The unrest, led largely by young demonstrators, erupted across Kathmandu, the country's capital, as security forces clashed with crowds demanding accountability and an end to entrenched corruption. Hours before stepping down, the government restored access to Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and X, which had been blocked in a move critics says was aimed at silencing dissent. The turmoil forced an indefinite curfew in the capital and prompted multiple cabinet resignations, including Home Minister Ramesh Lekak, who quit on moral grounds. Now, authorities announced compensation for the dead and free treatment for the injured, while an injury panel is expected to deliver its findings within 15 days. Protesters defied restrictions, torching the homes of senior politicians, underscoring public anger and deepening calls for a new era of political accountability in the Himalayan nation. This was massive, 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 massive. And it started from just a level of insincerity here, because when we're talking about the social media ban, I think we should also take a few steps back and say that this, to some extent, started because you had children of the elite, so-called Nepo babies, using social media to show reflections of their lives, which in comparison was, very flashy, lives of opulence, designer, material goods, luxury travel and the like. And this is something that angers a lot of people all over the world, because if you want to show that this is the type of life you lead, you should be able to justify how you're able to afford it. And if you're able to afford this through public funds, that's going to make a lot of people angry. And if you continue to ignore the plight of the people, this is what you see. It's not justifiable, but it is understandable that people always have the right to declare and express their disappointment and their anger with their leadership. This situation, unfortunately, grew because it felt as though, again, this government is using its high-handedness to silence us. So what the Nepalese government had announced is that all social media companies had to register with the country's Ministry of Communications by a certain date. date. And when that date passed, some had failed to do so, which was the justification the government used to switch off access to these social media platforms. Clearly something that was not met with grace by the vast majority of Nepalese youth. And then even when they called off the social media ban, the fire had already started. People had already gone too far. So we saw the harrowing images of Parliament building being set on fire, quite literally set alight, them breaking into the homes of politicians, beating politicians mercilessly. We saw the Nepalese foreign minister, I believe her home was broken into. She was punched and kicked and beaten. We saw many pictures of politicians being chased through the streets, chased into water. And that has to be something that we have to condemn, right? Yes. Because this is not something that should be allowed, that should be encouraged. But this is another example of what happens when people are pushed to the brink. Complete loss of control and desperation. So when we're seeing these things, we can understand that people have a right to gather, to express their discontent, and to, of course, protest. But when everything calms down and we see the destruction, it's going to take time. It's going to take money that should be distributed elsewhere to now rebuild this country. So I think it's a stark reminder to the people and to the government around the world that you are always accountable to your people. And if you go too long ignoring their plight, disassociating their struggles with your own personal lives, this can happen. We've seen something similar to this in terms of NSAS here in Nigeria, which started out against police brutality, and that obviously crescendoed into a greater issue. But it is unfortunate that we're seeing this happening to Nepal, but it is also a stark reminder to politicians that you are not above the law or above people's anger.
Yeah, the power of the people is more important than the people in power.
There is that too.
But, you've said it all really about this Nepal protest, and I would say that, we also have to contextualize what's going on in Nepal, but also what's going on in the wider region. The first time we saw images like this is in Sri Lanka in 2022, when protesters entered the presidential palace and were swimming in his pool. We've also seen Nepo baby protests in Mongolia, which ended up in their prime minister resigning. Yes. It did not get this violent. However, it's the son of the prime minister's wife, and they were showing their luxury lifestyle and their luxury things, and that spiraled into protests that ended up with the head of the government there having to resign. We've also seen resignations and protests we've seen in Indonesia. Right, they didn't have resignations there, but they had protests just last week. Yes. We've also seen resignations in Thailand. We've seen resignations in Japan. What is happening in the world right now? And I think a lot of leaders need to pay attention to this, because these young people are seeing luxury and excess and wealth, sometimes by members of their own government, but also worldwide.
Yes.
At the same time, inequity is widening.
Yes.
The poorest of the poor are getting poorer, and people are hungry. And Nepal is similar to Nigeria in that they have a large young population that's unemployed. So people are desperate, and they're going through hard times, and every single day they're looking at the excesses of others. It's something that causes depression. Definitely. And it's something that can cause crisis in different countries. And I definitely think that we need to think very, very carefully about the future of the young people in our countries.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Adesua. We've got one more story on the week that was, and that is US President Donald Trump on Friday announcing during an interview on Fox News that the suspect involved in the shooting death of activist and close ally Charlie Kirk has been apprehended. Now, this announcement marks a major step toward the ongoing investigation after the FBI deployed a nationwide search for the suspect in the wake of the shooting during a speaking event at the university in Utah. Yes, we've seen that news. We've seen earlier in the week pictures of the suspect that we saw on the screen there, first running across the roof of the building following the immediate shooting. And then, of course, these images of the suspect. He's now been apprehended and I believe identified by the police there. We know that the governor of Utah, Utah State had made clear that he wanted to apprehend this person as soon as possible. We do know that Utah, I know we're fast forwarding, Utah is a state that does have the death penalty, and this is a state that is not happy that something like this could have happened on its own grounds. Charlie Kirk's assassination has really festered a lot of rhetoric on social media all over the world. You've got people in different countries, people in the United Kingdom, lots of social media influencers giving in their own 2 pence, and it's been very interesting to see because you've got some, if you can call them perhaps born-again Christian influencers or Christian influencers, really are in support of Charlie Kirk and his views and his ability to speak to what they believe is a new form of Christianity and nationalism. And then you've got other people who say that, isn't it powerfully ironic that this man was shot in the neck while he was answering a question about whether or not, about his thoughts on mass shootings. This is someone who has made quite offensive comments when it comes to gun violence and says that sometimes when people are killed in mass shootings, that this is just a casualty of, a greater war. This is somebody who does believe in the rights for Americans to bear arms, and it's just a cruel sense of irony that it is this very type of gun violence that has claimed his own life.
Definitely. As you said, he believes very strongly in the Second Amendment right to bear arms, and when he was asked about children who had died in a school shooting, he was like, that's just the price you pay. And now he has died in a school shooting. As you said, it's terribly ironic, and it is very sad, and it's something that must be condemned. Like, political violence and political assassination must be condemned. However, this is also what you get as a result of people who spread violence. And I no longer think that the Utah governor is going to seek the death penalty because, of course, the suspect has been named as Tyler Robinson. He's a 22-year-old white Mormon man from Utah whose parents are registered Republicans, and the governor came out and said that I was praying it wasn't one of us. I was praying it was someone from a different country.
And now what, Mr.
And
Governor?
now what? He was born in 2003 and went to university in Utah for 1 semester before dropping out. And it's coming to appear as though he might have been to the right of Charlie Kirk and a follower of Nick Fuentes, who leads the America First movement, and a group of young boys. They call themselves Guyopas. And I think what was on his bullets were gaming terms and some of these meme terms that are seen prominently in this right-wing group. And they're in pictures of him with his parents and with guns from a very young age.
Did you look at that?
And and he was brought into the police by his father, who recognized him from the pictures, and his youth pastor in the Mormon church. So the prominent people before who were saying it's a civil war and we must get them have now retracted and said they should now pray. They should now pray for Tyler Robinson and his family.